So like all this time, there's not even like there's a complete like agreement among everyone all this time that worker just means anyone who's employed. I thought that was like a fringe thing. So wait, hold on. So when leftists and socialists and communists are talking about the working class and the proletariat and the workers, and they're reading the Communist Manifesto, and they're reading all of this socialist literature from centuries ago. Wait, they actually have like Netflix employees in mind? It's my favorite. Graduate student unions. Graduate students, grad students read the Communist Manifesto. They're like, this is about me. Wait, I didn't know. Oh shit, really? For real? That's what they meant by workers? Google it? They meant Google coders and engineers? Is that what they meant by workers? What the fuck? If you go ask a regular American person who's the working class, they're gonna be like, yeah, construction workers, people working with their hands, electricians, factory work. They're gonna be like, yeah, those are working class jobs. And then apparently on Twitter it's different. I don't know. I guess that's what theory does for you. So what theory does, apparently, right? And I don't know where they're getting it from either. Apparently theory allows you to put on the you put on the goggles of stupidity on, and you start to look at the world differently. So all of a sudden, graduate students and Google engineers and Netflix workers become the working class. Wow! No, it's like when Vosh was like, listen, the vaccines were made by the workers, not the pharmaceutical companies, but the workers. What the fuck are you talking about? Dude, everybody who's an employee is a worker? Are you stupid? We don't live in an age where like people don't own shit in this day and age. Everyone's a fucking worker. Even a CEO's a worker, you dumbass. A CEO's a worker. And I want to be clear with you guys about something. We're gonna have a long stream explaining this shit. It's not about suffering, okay? Even if the Netflix workers were getting paid in dog shit, they weren't even getting paid in real money, but actual, like, literal dog shit. Like, let's say the CEO of Netflix had a dog, and the dog took a shit in the bag, and that's what they paid these workers in, right? They didn't even get paid money, and then they're homeless, and they can't afford food, and they're suffering. That still wouldn't change my position. Their job is a fucking parasitical job that does not, objectively speaking, does not produce value. And we're gonna go into Marx's distinction between productive and unproductive labor. I'm gonna break down to you why jobs, like all professional managerial jobs and salaried jobs, have nothing to do with proletarian labor. Absolutely nothing. They have absolutely nothing to do with labor in the proletariat in the sense of the working class. Nothing. These are literal, when I say parasites, like I've written stuff about this, okay? So I'm not just calling them names. From an objective Marxist scientific view, from the perspective of Marxist scientific materialism, they are objectively a class of social parasites. In the sense that all they do is suck and recycle the value that is produced by the American working class. The workers of America are feeding these people, feeding them, and in return, they're writing creative shows on Netflix, whatever the fuck. We're talking at that level of That's what I mean by parasitism, you know? I'm not just calling them a name. There's like a scientific framework from which I'm proceeding in calling them parasites. They are literally parasites. They do nothing. Even from a literary and artistic perspective, right? From a literary and artistic perspective, they don't even produce any content which inspires labor. Like in the sense, like they don't produce content that reproduces the conditions of labor itself in the sense of like China's Wandering Earth, where you're valorizing. Even the content itself is culturally parasitic. You know what I mean? But look, let's say I was like, I speak on behalf of Twitch streamers, right? Yeah, I'm a parasite too. I don't produce value. I take money. I don't produce value. Yeah. In terms of the class I belong to, yeah, I'm a parasite too. Hell yeah, I'm a parasite. In terms of my class, not personally or individually, but like, if you take me as a class of what people in my class do, who go on the fucking internet and take money from people, yeah, I'm a social parasite. I'm not engaging in any productive labor. Are caretakers PMC? No. And you want to know why? Because caretaking doesn't take that much education to do. What do service workers like cashiers and stuff figure into all this? Well, I have another theory about that, which is my theory of value in the 21st century, which is more consumption-sided, which is basically like, if they are workers, it's not because of the jobs they're doing at the floor, right? It's because we have something called the worker citizen. Let me explain it to you guys like this, right? We're gonna get really in the nitty-gritty of this later, right? But I'll answer your question like this. Today, the production of value doesn't happen at the shop floor. It's not happening at the level of one company or one shop floor or one thing like this. It's happening at an aggregate and even political and national level, which means we are entering an age of the worker citizen. Now, the worker citizen is the labor that the citizens of a given state are responsible for the aggregate production of value, okay? And the reason why I mentioned citizen is because the way in which the commodity is produced today is no longer, and this is going to be really crazy, right, that I'm going to say this, is no longer private in the 19th century liberal sense. It may still be private, but in a radically different way than any of us are familiar with today. Remember, no one solved the paradox of classical Marxism yet, which is, how is it that our money isn't backed by fucking gold? You guys realize that if our this is what Marx says in Capital, or in one of his writings, I forget which one. He goes, the currency that serves as the universal currency for the capitalist economy must be a currency that crystallizes and embodies within itself a standard of labor. The cost of the production of the currency itself, according to Marx. So the cost, or the labor time, or whatever you want to call it, of the production of currency itself is going to serve as a universal equivalent for all the other commodities. I forgot which exact passage, but yeah. So what Marx is saying is that the reason gold is the universal currency, at least in so far as how it functions in the capitalist economy, is because of the amount of abstract labor crystallized within it. Or sorry, the amount of labor crystallized within it. Gold has labor in it, embodied in it, because it takes labor to mine the gold or whatever the fuck, right? Well, now that the government prints money, you have to reevaluate how you're looking at it, right? And no Marxist who's pretending to be a Marxist has solved this problem. There's a smart guy, his name is Jehu, and he's a blogger. His name is Jehu, and he had a blog that was called The Real Movement. And he theorized that we have moved outside of capitalism itself, and now that we live in he thinks we live in a fascist country or whatever. But he says all these things because for him, the fact that we've moved away from the gold standard means the law of value is no longer operative. It's no longer like what's determining our economy. Now, I disagree with him, but he has recognized the significance of this scandal, that we don't have the gold standard anymore. The scandal for Marxism, I mean. It is a fundamental scandal, right? Which people are not talking about. Would products like laptops or cars, but no, it's hard to explain it, but one of the ways you have to think about fiat currency is, one, there's a difference between the real value behind a currency and the currency, Netflix workers are not workers. It's as simple as that. A worker is not simply someone who is employed by another. And I think we need to have an arc where we debate about this, because I don't see how, let me give you an example of this. Can you go back to the question about money? Yeah, we're gonna get there. We're gonna do this one by one. So this is the tweet which started it all, basically. I think I poked the beehive because I just exposed something. I've just exposed something crazy, which is, that's who these people are! This is their class! All these lefties have professions similar to the Netflix people. They are parasites, social parasites, and I just declared class warfare against them. I just declared class war against the professional, managerial parasites. The people who like Vaush, the people who like Hassan, the rank and file, the class basis of the left. You know why I take my views for granted so much? Because I literally wrote, like, small pieces. I don't know what you call them. They're not books. They're small, you know, they're about 20,000 words or something. And I did it like a few years ago, and I was like, oh, okay. And I just take it for granted now. I forgot that most people still think that Netflix employees are working class. Post them. I'm actually finishing one of them now. And when I finish it, I might just post. I was planning on doing a 3-part series. Actually, there's a post I did reflecting on the midterms. And I might just release that one. I might just release the one I did about the midterms. Because that one I explained my views about the different classes of America. It was from like 2018 or something. And I just briefly theorized the different classes in America. And I did a class analysis of the class situation in America. And I might just release that one. It's not enough just to be hired to have a wage. There's a very specific reason why in Marxist time, the mass of people who were being hired for a living were proletarians. And the reason was because there was a process of converting this older form of small proprietorship and earlier forms of making a living into just raw, abstract, whatever, proletarian wage labor. We live in a society where everything is so socialized. Everyone works for a wage. Every type of profession is hired somehow, right? Every single profession now is paid in a salary or in a wage or has become like abstract. But here's the thing that's even worse, is that's even not necessarily true. I'll tell you why it's not necessarily true. The so-called labor of a doctor and the labor of a Netflix worker is not commensurate. These are not forms of labor that belong to the same abstract labor. Abstract labor is the least quantum of unskilled labor. These are qualitatively different forms of labor, not only in terms of like what they do, that's obvious, but in terms of how they're denominated, how they're paid for, how much you get in return for them. It's not like you have on the one hand a capitalist who is like, oh, let me hire this doctor, let me hire this lawyer, let me hire this Netflix worker, all for the same self-valorizing process of capital accumulation. If you're a doctor, you're going to work for a very specific type of institution, a very specific type of company, which isn't liquefying all relations constituent of the community for the pursuit of profit alone. So in this sense, we have entered this kind of return to the pre-capitalist form of production of CMC. It's no longer like all relations are being converted into forms of wage labor that are commensurate with each other in the form of exchange, their exchange value. They're qualitatively different, right? The guy goes, so what is the working class? Define it for me. He said the word for this is sophistry, using a poorly defined concept as an excuse to deny the basic, barefaced reality by any sociological, cultural, intuitive, common sense that these people are not the working class in the historical and colloquial sense. Let me add to that too. That's the working class. Not fucking Netflix employees. Very simple. The working class is only defined by the abstraction of work in general because the nature of its work is general. This is literally it. This is so simple, dude. This is so simple. I just literally fucking solved the issue of defining it. So it's like this. I'm going to run it through like this. Again, education time, right? A normal person would be like, they write shows, they don't shovel coal or shit, right? But these are Marxoids, so you have to explain to them theoretically, right? This is sophistry, using a poorly defined concept as an excuse to deny the basic, barefaced reality by any sociological, cultural, intuitive common sense. These people are not the working class in the historical and current colloquial sense. Historically, it sufficed to define the working class as those who must sell their labor rather than own capital. This was because of sociological, historical material realities in the relations of production that no longer hold true for today. This can easily be explained. During the period of proletarianization, people were uprooted from their traditional means of production and and all forms of labor were subjected to the common measurement and denominator of abstract wage labor. Thus, those who did not already possess a form of capital and had only their labor to sell could easily be identified as the working class or the proletariat because they had freshly emerged from pre-capitalist, pre-modern, and pre-social instantiations of labor or production. Sociologically and culturally, they were far more specific as a class then, as in the case today, all those who fall under the vague and extremely general standard of not owning capital or the companies that they work. Today, when the unprecedented socialization of labor has already taken hold to such an extent that all forms of employment are post-capitalist and subjected to capital's self-valorizing process, after the age of imperialism and the rise of an institutionalized state bureaucracy, corporatization, increasing forms of specialization, professionalization, other institutional instantiations of human ability, has torn asunder the universal commensuratality of all forms of employment, it's not specific enough to simply not own your company to be working class. These are qualitatively different forms of employment that are heavily institutionalized, and thus their fundamental quality of socialization, and therefore being able to be defined by a common abstract labor, has in a sense regressed into a form defined specially, institutionally, distinctly, in a way that is separate from the rest of society. This is actually one of the reasons Marx and Engels talk about the necessity of measuring labor value beginning only with the least quantum of unskilled labor, because the other forms of labor are merely arithmetic additions, multiplications of the original quantum. Now, to speak of a working class obviously entails those human beings entering into the process of socialization who are being employed based on their work in a sense of the least quantum of unskilled labor relative to their society. In our society, there is more or less a standard of education, skill, specifically at the national institutional level, including unions, but nonetheless, they represent the basic standard by which human beings enter into the realm of exchange within our economy. That's the working class. Not the fucking Netflix employees. It's very simple. The working class is only defined by the abstraction of work in general because the nature of its work is general. This is such a good quote. This is such a good fucking quote. It's called the working class. Okay, I'm gonna just tweet it like this. TLDR. It's called the working class. The working in working class is only general rather than referring to a specific, special form of work because the very nature of the labor itself is general, represents labor that more or less the broad majority of people are engaging in already. Now, we already got quote tweets. This is the first quote tweet. This is what they said. Yeah, bitch, that's all you can do. Because, yeah, that's all you can do. I was assuming a response. There's no response. There can never be a response. These people have nothing. They have absolutely fucking nothing. Your claim that the Marxist definition of the working class is outdated and inaccurate? No, that's not true. The Marxist definition was never inadequate, but blanketly applying what Marxists said 100 years ago to today is a form of opportunism. Simple as. It was and thus is still 100% correct because of its context. Simple as. Also, my tweet blew up on a subreddit called Shit Liberals Say. I have to basically explain that Netflix workers, Netflix employees, they don't produce value. So I want you guys to understand something about Marxist economics really quick, or Marxist critique of political economy. So in Marxist critique of political economy, what BreadTube is teaching you is that some people own the means of production, other ones don't. And if you don't own the means of production, you're a worker. And if you own it, you're a capitalist. Yeah, that's not true. First of all, there's different kinds of ownership, and not all of them mean you're a capitalist. Some forms of ownership are rentier in nature, right? Ground rent and collecting ground rent doesn't make you a capitalist because you're getting a constant stream of rent, which is ultimately not about profit, right? You didn't have to invest anything initially, and if you did, you eventually pay it off, and at that point, you're just making money from nothing, right? It's rent. You're making money without having to do anything. You're just sitting on your ass making money, right? Well, the people who are employed in professions that are based on using your head, right, not your actual labor, those are people who are just being paid the proceeds of ground rent. And if they're getting paid the proceeds of ground rent, you're actually not a proletarian, you're not a worker because you're not producing surplus value. You're not producing any surplus value, you're just getting paid the proceeds of ground rent. Okay?